Weather has changed, it's gotten colder, the leaves are falling, fall breaks, and soon we're back to winter. Which reminds me, we gotta talk about Smiley Smile today. Welcome back, fans of 1967. Last week, we talked about the first disc, the orange disc, of the 1967 Sunshine Tomorrow CD release from 2017. That disc covered material pertaining mostly to Wild Honey. Stereo remix of the album, sessions, Wild Honey live takes, all sorts of things like that. So if you're a big Wild Honey fan and you missed that video, better go check that out before you watch this one. But the two CD set, while of course the new stereo mix of Wild Honey was a major selling point, is not strictly a Wild Honey collection, even though we did see the Wild Honey imagery on the front. The second disc talks about the other 1967 album, and you know it, and I know it too, Smiley Smile. Smiley Smile had gotten a full stereo remix back in 2012, so they didn't need to remix it again, but we do have a few little surprises on the Sunshine Tomorrow CD number 2. That's the blue one here. So let's get into that today. We'll talk about the Smiley Smile material and also Lei'd in Hawaii, which we'll get to in just a moment. But let's jump in because disc 2 starts off with Smiley Smile stuff. And hold up the Smiley Smile record for you. So first thing on the CD, Heroes and Villains single version backing track. We have a lot of outtakes from Heroes and Villains from the Smile era, a lot of things that the group was contemplating for the song, and Heroes and Villains seems like a very ambitious project. Indeed, even the big Smile set has a whole CD devoted strictly to Heroes and Villains material, but on this CD release we get the single version backing track there, so if you had the big Smile set, this would still be new and different for you. We get an extended version of Vegetables. This is not the Smile version, it's an extended version of the Smiley Smile one here. So different ambiance, of course, and no Mama Says, no eat a lot, sleep a lot kind of stuff there. Fall breaks and back to winter, a slightly longer alternate mix is used. There's no other session material released for Fall breaks and back to winter, either on the CD or on the, if I can find it, on the digital set. We talked about some of the stuff that was considered for the CD but not used was made available here. We'll come back to that a little bit more later, of course. Then we have the backing track for Wonderful. Again, the Smiley Smile version. Pretty interesting stuff there. A lot of focus on those some songs from Smile that were redone later on. We have the alternate tag for Wind Chimes. Yet another Smile song that was reworked for Smiley Smile. This one's very short, only about 50 seconds. Mostly a vocal rehearsal, that kind of thing. With Me Tonight, alternate version with session intro. We see a lot of With Me Tonight sessions. We've seen them released previously. Things like Hawthorne, California have used them. Here we get just a pretty short kind of rehearsal snippet there, nothing too crazy. Again, mostly rehearsal of the We Are With Me Tonight kind of stuff there. Put it down there, I'll show you the CD again. We have Little Pad backing track. In my video on the Sunshine Tomorrow 2 sessions, I accidentally said that this release had the only Little Pad sessions. I had forgotten, of course, we do get the instrumental backing track here, so I misspoke in that last video. Sorry about that. Then we have 2 quick rehearsals of All Day, All Night, better known as Whistlin', mostly kind of practicing the Remember the Day, Remember the Night kind of stuff. And indeed, that was obviously something the group was really into at the time, as there's a live rehearsal of that, some different takes and things floating around for that kind of stuff. And lastly, for Smiley Smile sessions there, we only get 10 tracks, the last one being Untitled Redwood, a 35-second snippet that was never given a title. It's called Redwood because it's believed to be an early track for Three Dog Night, who were originally called Redwood, or called Redwood at one point early in their careers. Very short instrumental fragment. The liner notes don't talk much about it. Seems to be just a little odd or end that they found and just kind of stuffed in there. Now we get to what I think is the main point of disc 2. The Smiley Smile stuff is interesting, but there's nothing really essential. We get, for the first time in its entirety, the 1967 live album, as most of it was done live in studio, not live for an audience. Lei'd in Hawaii. I've talked about Lei'd in Hawaii quite a bit before. When I visited Hawaii, I looked at Beach Boys locations, I talked about it. Talked about the actual live in Hawaii concerts that nobody was too impressed with, thus making the group want to get into studio and kind of make this fake live album that way. Pretty interesting stuff. But now we get Lei'd in Hawaii in its entirety. This was, for me, the big selling point of this CD set. A lot of people bought it for Wild Honey Stereo. I bought it because I wanted the complete Lei'd in Hawaii. I love Lei'd in Hawaii a lot more than most other Beach Boys fans probably do. A lot of fun stuff on there. So we start off with Fred Vale doing a quick intro. He talks about the Beach Boys concert album from 1964, which you remember had been a big hit, went all the way to #1, and they tried to follow it up several times, but to no avail. So here Fred Vale comes on and talks about the Memorial Auditorium being empty because the Beach Boys are in Hawaii. I never quite understood why he says there's nothing under the seats but chairs, gum, and litter. So chairs are under seats? I don't quite know what that's supposed to mean. But just a real quick intro, nothing of great substance. We have their in-studio version of The Letter. We had heard about this before, of course. It was released back in the 80s on Beach Boys Rarities. And it was released for the first time to CD in 2006, uncovered by the Beach Boys. So this is one that most people had heard. I should add, just as Wild Honey was remixed almost completely to stereo, most of Lei'd in Hawaii is presented in mono to kind of give it that 1960s authenticity. I wonder if they'd considered doing a vinyl release of just Lei'd in Hawaii at one point. 50 years down the road, but that didn't happen ultimately. They did reissue the stereo Wild Honey to vinyl, but they didn't release Lei'd in Hawaii to vinyl. But The Letter is one you had probably heard before as a Beach Boys fan or as a collector, that sort of thing. But you probably hadn't heard the second one on the list there, You're So Good to Me, which had been a B-side for Sloop John B beforehand, and this was a recording from Lei'd in Hawaii that had never been released before. We'll see as we go through the track list that some had and some hadn't been made available on other releases. You're So Good to Me is one of the few I'm not a big fan of. Lei'd in Hawaii is a very vocal album, very light backing instrumentation, an organ, light percussion, that kind of stuff. It's almost focused entirely on the Beach Boys' harmonies and vocals. You're So Good to Me, I think that works better with the big, bombastic, Phil Spector approach, the huge backing band, that kind of thing. I don't think it quite translates as well as it could into kind of a lighter song there. Help Me Rhonda and California Girls are next two. Those were both released in stereo on Made in California. They were at the end there with the last disc, of course, of Made in California as kind of a random amalgam of different Beach Boys sessions and alternate takes and remixes and all kinds of things like that. And both of those are included, of which I'm very glad. They sound a little bit better on that set because they're in stereo, but it's nice to have them in mono as well. The weirdest thing about Help Me Rhonda is they redid it as Help You Rhonda. So in this case the girl was just broken up with and a guy's offering to help her. They didn't do it that way live. I can't say I blame them for that because that would have to be so confusing to have sung Help Me Rhonda for 2 years and suddenly have to flip all those pronouns and things around. That would have been a huge pain. Interestingly, it's still called Help Me Rhonda here, but Made in California calls it Help You Rhonda, which would be more correct, I think. Interesting stuff. We have Surfer Girl coming up next there. The Lei'd in Hawaii version of Surfer Girl had been used before. It was the big finale track to the Good Vibrations box set, and an alternate take would be used as the big finale here. If you watch this video on Sunshine Tomorrow 2, I talked about how I really like this alternate take. It's actually my favorite version, where they do the song but it's kind of in the past tense. It's sort of done as like a nostalgic number. I really like that. But they do sound great. It's definitely one that's used to highlight their vocal abilities in 1967, their ability to harmonize, and that's certainly a worthy choice. Sloop John B makes an appearance, again done in this new style. That is exclusive to this set, had not been released elsewhere before. With a Little Help from My Friends. That's another one that dates back to the 80s. It was made available on Rarities back in 1983, and it was also released to CD in 2006. So that was one most people had heard, and we'll talk more about that in a minute, but we have a session take on this set as well. And we'll get back to With Little Help from My Friends again in just a moment. Then we have Their Hearts Were Full of Spring. The liner notes here say that this is taken from one of the actual live Hawaii rehearsals, and it was kind of flown over to be used there. And it is indeed part of a much longer take here. There's actually like some false starts, you know, a few sessions they messed up, and there's kind of like a rough take, and then the actual Lei'd in Hawaii one is the very end. The track on here runs about 8 minutes. The actual Their Hearts Are Full of Spring runs about 2.5. So it's interesting that they did keep one, I guess you'd say, actual live thing, but it wasn't done for an audience. It was just a live rehearsal. Good to have it here. That's also one we'd seen several other places. Way back on the twofer, they had Their Hearts Were Full of Spring as a bonus track, and it was also part of the big intro on Hawthorne, California. And there is a take from 1963 that pops up on a lot of box sets as well, so it's definitely a song the group rehearsed a lot, worked on quite a bit. We probably just had their skills honed just perfectly. Yeah, so pretty fun to have it here. We wouldn't see an actual factual Beach Boys release of Their Hearts Were Full of Spring till a couple years later on the Live in London album. It was done as their big a cappella number there. God Only Knows, that had previously been released on Endless Harmony soundtrack. So people have probably heard that one before. Followed up with Good Vibrations. That, of course, would be on this release, the Good Vibrations 12-inch single. Although it claims to be an actual live performance, it's actually the Lei'd in Hawaii studio take, that kind of thing. Interestingly, in much the same way, the publicity for Sunshine Tomorrow basically ignored Beach Boys rarities. This release also ignored Beach Boys rarities, claiming that a track that was brand new when it actually had been released on the Rarities album before. So Rarities is obscure enough that a lot of Beach Boys publicity people can deny its existence and doesn't really seem to bother anybody. But anyway, interesting stuff there to see. Good Vibrations done in kind of that stripped down basic style. We have something new that we had never heard before. Their cover of the Mindbenders' Game of Love. Interestingly, that's in stereo. The other songs were in mono, but I don't think Game of Love had ever even been bootlegged or anything, so it was really cool hearing it here, and the group does a nice job on it. It's very slow, very methodical. The purpose of a man, that kind of thing. Interesting stuff. I like it. A good capstone to what I guess would be considered the official Lei'd in Hawaii release. And we have an alternate take of The Letter, remixed into stereo. When it comes to The Letter, Made in California back in 2013 claimed they were using an alternate take, but it sounds exactly the same as the previously released takes. I said that in my Made in California video. Here you can at least tell it's mixed differently. You know, the stereo versus the mono. So that's, if nothing else, is a nice change. But you can tell that they've done something with this. It's not just the same one as before, you know, released again. And we have a stereo mix of With Little Help from My Friends as well. So we get some of those Lei'd in Hawaii tracks in stereo, most of them in mono. Those that were released elsewhere, you can certainly find them sometimes in stereo, sometimes in mono. Have to double check the liner notes for all that stuff. Then we have actual Live in Hawaii recordings, so things that were recorded live. At the time they hadn't been released. Of course, all of the Hawaii tapes would be released later in 2017 on Live Sunshine. But it's pretty interesting here, as none of these had been released before, so we were hearing some of these for the very first time. Hawthorne Boulevard, which remains exclusive to the Hawaii shows and nowhere else. Probably the last true blues surf rocker the group ever wrote and recorded. It's a very short song, less than a minute actually. Uses kind of the intro to the show on August the 26th. Let's take a trip down Hawthorne Boulevard! And it's just a fun little surf instrumental. Surfin', also from the 26th of August, appears very briefly. There was some banter and stuff that was kind of cut down on for the digital release. Or should I say it was cut down for the CD release. It's longer on the digital one. But pretty interesting stuff there. Surfin' was a song they had considered for the studio Lei'd in Hawaii. A backing track exists. Could be some vocal takes out there somewhere. They didn't ultimately use it. Surfin' has never been a live staple. It's been used as a concert intro, things like that before, but never to any great substance. So it's really cool to have it here. Here it's actually more of an early version of Do It Again. They add a lot of the riffs and concepts they would use later on in Do It Again into this particular take of Surfin'. Very interesting. Also very short. From the 25th of August, we have Gettin' Hungry, which was the hot new single. As I've mentioned before, interestingly enough, Gettin' Hungry was marketed as a Mike and Brian single, not as a Beach Boys one. And Mike Love jokes about that, oh, we did it all ourselves with a little help from the rest of the group, and that's his usual kind of Mike Love style. I still think that was maybe the reason Gettin' Hungry didn't find an audience, was because it wasn't a Beach Boys single, so it's probably kind of harder to promote that. Gettin' Hungry hasn't been done live since that I'm aware of, at least not by the Beach Boys anyway. And although we don't get any session stuff, I guess this live take kind of replaces that. We would get a really funky backing track on that digital set, and that's a lot of fun. Then we have rehearsal takes from the 26th of both Hawaii and Heroes and Villains. Heroes and Villains wasn't ultimately done for the Lei'd in Hawaii project, but at least a fragment of it was recorded, so it was probably something they experimented with and just didn't really want to go with. Hawaii, of course, was used extensively in the live shows. It had been a live staple before that, and since you're playing a concert in Honolulu, it would make sense to rehearse some of Hawaii. And of course, both of those alternate edits of those would appear later on the digital set. Pretty cool stuff. Almost there, folks. Get my last paper. Then we have some 1967 shows. From Washington, D.C. at the Daughters of the American Revolution Hall on November the 19th, 1967, we have both California Girls and Graduation Day. Pretty interesting recordings there. Again, we would find those on this digital set as well. Several other songs from those DC shows would be released on the Pet Sounds collection, the 2016 Pet Sounds collection. We talk more about that stuff in my video on the digital release. And then one more live track, I Get Around, recorded in Boston, November the 23rd, 1967. Here we have the audience vote, would you rather hear I Get Around or Sloop John B? Of course, in reality, the band did both songs. That was probably planned. Here we just get the I Get Around live performance. But that was pretty interesting because by 1968 they were starting to kind of boot I Get Around out of the live set. So it's interesting they were still doing it here and the crowd still loves it. And we have our big finale to the Blue CD and to the Sunshine Tomorrow set. We have first Surf's Up, 1967 version. This is actually an extended recording of one that was released on that last kind of random disc on Made in California. That's just Brian playing it and singing it. Here we actually have some sessions. Brian kind of messes up a few times and starts over, that kind of thing. It's a little bit random here, especially after all this live material, to have Surf's Up kind of come out of nowhere. But I don't doubt it was here to help kind of keep that link between Smile and Wild Honey, you know, clear, and make sure that, hey, they were still doing stuff with these songs, and indeed Friends, 2020, Sunflower, and Surf's Up, all the albums that followed, would certainly have Smile DNA in them. It's a little random, but I do like that it's here, and I like that we get an extended take with a couple flubs. Makes it interesting. And lastly, Surfer Girl 1967 a cappella mix. So this is the Lei'd in Hawaii take, but without any instruments, just the group's vocals. Makes for a really great finale. Again, this had been the finale back in 1993 on the Good Vibrations set. So it's nice to have it here as well as the finale. Pretty cool stuff. And the fact it's a cappella also makes it very interesting. And that does it for Sunshine Tomorrow. We get, of course, the alternate write-up on Wild Honey that talks about how they were going to use the letter at one point on Wild Honey. Seems to really be the only song from the Lei'd in Hawaii era they wanted to reuse. They were considering repurposing. Very, very interesting stuff. All told, a fun set. And I think a fitting capstone to our celebration of Smiley Smile's anniversary. What are your thoughts on Sunshine Tomorrow? Do you have any favorite tracks from Wild Honey, Smiley Smile, or Lei'd in Hawaii? Any cool remixes we should have gotten, or any cool fan-made ones you've heard about, please comment them below. Remember to like and subscribe. Stay tuned for some fun Halloween stuff. We'll see you next time. So long.